At the end of today's devotion, I would like to share with you about the 3 most stressful hours, possibly, of my entire life. But before we get there, our reading today is from 1 Timothy chapter 3, where the Apostle Paul is speaking to young Timothy, his protege, about some offices that are occupied within the church, the offices of elder or overseer and deacon. And as the Apostle Paul is instructing Timothy, he gives some qualifications for what these roles are supposed to look like. And what's interesting in this is that Paul doesn't relate to Timothy how these roles interrelate with each other. He doesn't relate to Timothy necessarily the structure of the church. He, in other words, gives some, it seems like, flexibility about how these roles will interrelate and what their specific tasks will be. What he does emphasize, though, in this particular passage of Scripture is not the structure of the roles, but the character of those who will be a part of those roles. So in 1 Timothy 3, the list is so long for the people who would be in church leadership, I thought would be worth reading. So here it is. Here's a trustworthy saying: if anyone sets his heart on being an overseer, he desires a noble task. Now the overseer must be above reproach, the husband of but one wife, self-controlled, temperate, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own family well and see that his children obey him with proper respect. If anyone does not know how to manage his own family, how can he take care of God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become conceited and fall under the same judgment as the devil. He must also have a good reputation with outsiders so that he will not fall into disgrace and into the devil's trap. Wow, like a really long list. And that's just the one just for elders or for overseers. I mean, in this place, it's like with all those qualifications, who could qualify? In fact, I remember being in a job interview for a church position one time, and the elders of the church actually pulled out this passage and said, Robbie, this is how you'll functionally operate here. We want to go through each one of these. And they went through every single one and asked me questions about each one. It's really important. But gosh, it can kind of seem judgmental because after all, isn't church supposed to be a welcoming place? Are we really here to be judgmental of people? Are we really here to say, gosh, there's this many rules? Well, the Apostle Paul in this passage seems to be indicating that there is a big, big difference between those that we welcome into our audience and those that we appoint to be our leaders. And that we can't confuse these two things, that we must maintain high standards for those who are in places of leadership within the church. And it can seem judgmental, right? But it is very important and necessary. Let me illustrate this for you. Those 3 most stressful hours. A few years back when I was becoming a chaplain for the Greenville County Sheriff's Office, this is a position where they are going to give me literally all the powers of a certified deputy. And I had to go to school at the same training academy as regular deputies to go through the legals and go through the field training and go through all the tactics and shooting the guns and driving the cars and all that stuff. And so in the course of this training, in the interview section of all of these qualifications, I went through psychological evaluations and background checks and financial checks and so many different things. And part of these qualifications was that you had to be able to pass a lie detector test. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever been through a lie detector test. They are really stressful. And what I'm calling possibly the 3 most stressful hours of my life. Because as I'm driving there, I thought, I don't have anything that I'm lying about. But what if by some measure I don't pass? I can't go back to my church and say, hey, I failed the lie detector test. About what? It's like, what am I putting in jeopardy for this volunteer position? But I sat down and the chair, when I went to take the lie detector test, the chair literally looked like an electric chair. I'm not kidding, like death row electric chair. You have these armrests and they put all sorts of sensors all over me to track biometrics. They put a blood pressure cuff on, and it was like, you can't move, keep your feet flat on the ground. The guy sitting literally off to your side and behind you. And we start going through it, and he says, Robbie, I'm going to ask you 12 questions, and they're all going to be yes or no questions. And I thought, how am I going to be here 3 hours for you to ask me 12 yes or no questions? He said, well, let me explain. The first time we go through, I'll ask you, and we're not going to be measuring anything. In fact, on 3 of those questions, I'm going to ask you to lie to me because it's going to be answers that are known. Like he asked me, are we in the state of South Carolina? He knew the answer to that question. He said, I want you to lie, say no. And then we're going to look at how your body responds when you lie. So I was like, okay, no. He said, now let's get to the more pointed questions. And the very first questions he asked me was this: Robbie, have you ever lied about something important? Y'all, I started confessing stuff. I'm not exaggerating, all the way back to the 5th grade in elementary school where I'd lied about something. And I mean, we went all the way through like life history. I'm just confessing stuff. He was like, okay, Pastor, listen. He said, now, when we come back around to this, I'm going to ask you, while we're measuring you, have you, with the exception of what you've already told me, have you ever lied about something important? And then we went through and they're measuring everything, and I'm thinking just what you would be. Did I pass? And yes, I passed. But at the end of our time together, he looked at me and he said, Pastor, the reason we do this, he said, we can bring a young deputy in, we can bring a chaplain in, and we can teach you to drive the cars and shoot the guns and book people into the jail. He said, but character, you have to bring that with you. Christians who aspire for leadership, there is a character, there is a standard of righteousness that you have to bring with you. A place not where we say, man, you have to be perfect, because if it was the standard was perfection, you know what? Nobody could ascend to a place of leadership except for the Lord Christ himself. Not even the Apostle Paul, who wrote these words, would have qualified. However, being a person who says, I am seeking after God, I will try to walk in holiness as much as possible, I have no open and known ongoing sin in my life. Those are qualifications that we need for people in leadership, because if we don't have them, then friends, here's the truth. Sometimes your competency can take you to where your character can't keep you. And we have to make sure that just because of a person's skill set, their natural leadership gifts, that they're not appointed to a place of leadership where their character can't keep them. In fact, in Psalm 78:72, it says this: and David shepherded Israel with integrity of heart, with skill of hand, he led them. Character first, competency second.